Okay, so I've progressed a little bit on the four-wheel steering removal. So essentially, as I suggested last time, I pulled the lines out of the engine bay. I've then followed on to the steering rack and discontinued all the way down to the back of the car. The difficult parts that I found were really essentially around the diff area, which the easiest option I found was removing of the or lowering of the K-frame. I was pulling the diff out anyway, so that made that a bit easier. So I'll just show you a couple of the problem points that I found, because I'm only using car stands under the car, and it's not heaps of room, so I'll just turn it around. So above the diff, there is this reservoir here, which I'll just get a light. Well, it's sort of like a distribution point which has all the lines coming into the four-wheel steering from the front. One connection goes straight to the diff, the pump on the top, and the other ones are coming down from to the steering rack on one side, and the other side from the front of the car. So that's right above the diff here. It's sort of hard to get up there. I've undone all the bolts. I just haven't pulled it out yet. I just thought I'd wait until I showed. So from there I had to lower the diff, pull the diff out, undid those ones to get the diff out. Then you got your steering rack at the back here. Undo the steering rack mounts and the rack ends. On the passenger side I had a bit of trouble because the bolt was just spinning, so I had to pry it up with a screwdriver to get some tension on it just to pull the bolt off, but it came up. Then from there we're removing lines. So these two lines here actually go into that distribution point above the diff or the K-frame, and then essentially these go into the other ends of these pipes here, and you get your other pipes that come up over the K-frame and back out. So they've all got mounting bolts that unbolt it. So once you undo them all, essentially it should just pull out. I think I've got one more mount to undo. That was essentially underneath the steering rack mount, or very close to, so it's hard to get a bolt onto it. So I'll pull that out and I'll pull the lines out and show you then. Okay, so I've got the lines out. I've got essentially just everything mocked up in position, so I can just sort of show people which way the cables hoses run, where they're connected to, just to hopefully give them a bit of a helping hand to get it all out. Because when I did some searching, it was very hard to find some really good information on where it all bolts to without having to read pages and pages of text that essentially the diagrams weren't. I didn't find them to be very good. So we'll start at the front of the car. These pipes which I've cut essentially are the ones that go into the reservoir. And they go into the engine bay, so they come under the sub frame at the front, go into the engine bay to the reservoir. Then we've got our two hoses here which are coming from the rack in the front. So it all goes to the back of the car, and then the rack lines are connected into this distribution point, which is mounted on top of the K-frame just near the diff, and it's feeding the rack. And then you have your returns coming back from your diff itself. So we've got our connection on the pump itself, and then a return flow, or that might be a feed. I'm not sure which exactly the way the hoses go. But essentially this device here is bolted in front of the pump on top of the K-frame. It's quite tight to get the bolts out. And I mean, you can take the diff out without it, but you just have to loosen this one. But if you're going to disconnect it, you might as well pull it all out. I've got our other lines coming down from this point to this mount here, which actually had a Phillips head screw, which it was a standard screw, but it was actually sort of semi-lodged underneath the sway bar. It might be because the car I've got has larger sway bars on it. With the standard sway bars, they might have a little bit more clearance, but essentially I had to loosen the sway bar mount here just to get a little bit more room to get this screw out, because the head of it was hitting the sway bar. And then our other bolts, essentially, there's a couple mounts above the diff, the steering rack itself, which just got your 2 mounts on each side, and then your link ends onto the lower control arms. So hopefully with a look at the system with it all in its entirety might give someone else a helping hand when they're trying to get it out, just to see where everything goes, and the best way to get it out. Now I'll just get under the car, I'll get some light, and I'll try and show you what I've used to fill the rack fittings at the front of the car. So I'll just get under the car now and set up and get a light under there. Okay, so I've just pulled one of the connections out because I was just testing fitting it the last couple of days. So what I've actually bought is an Aeroflow part. It's an Australian supplier. Essentially it's just a manufacturer of fittings, so AN fittings, all sorts of things like that. So I'll just turn it around and give you a quick look. So essentially it's made 4 steering racks. It's an M14 by 1.5 thread with an O-ring, and also got the little nipple here that goes into the brake line or the power steering rack. And it normally just has an AN fitting on the back. Okay, but I've just put a internally O-ringed 6AN cap on it, and it seems to do a really good job. So I set it in there just to test to make sure it goes in. And I'll just show you where they go. So when you're looking at the rack, let's turn it around. So this is it, sort of in the central middle of the car, where the rack line, steering rack line comes across, and it just screws in here. And then we have another one to the side, facing down, passenger side in an Australian car, just there. And yeah, just put them in there and hopefully it seals it up. So I'll know once I put oil in the system, once I get my new canister, and hopefully that'll help. I can post part numbers if someone needs them, but they're pretty easy to find, and I think they were $20 each, including the cap. So like $11 for the fitting and $8 or $9 for the cap, and that was all it was. Thank you.